Disclaimer. The following video deals with some really dark topics, including suicide bombing, mass terrorism, child brainwashing, and probably some other stuff, I don't know. If these aren't exactly your cup of tea, I'd recommend you skip this video. In addition, my use of humor in this video is not done in order to make light of these very serious topics or to support the people doing them, but rather to expose the absurdity of extremist propaganda. In addition, any imagery, documents, or media shared from designated terrorist organizations are included strictly for documentary, archival, and educational purposes, and are in support of any of these groups, which I, of course, fully disavow. Alright, I think that covers everything. Imagine a perfect kids website. You've got stories. You've got comics. You've got all the freshest news about successful suicide bombings in your area. You've got coloring exercises. You've got, you've got art that is beautiful. You've got art that is bad. You've got art that is so bad that it actually loops back to being good. You've got art that is JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. You've got kids games. You've got, ISIS. And of course you've got a lot of content about the armed wing of Hamas. You've got... Oh my god, is that an uncensored photo of a severed head? Yeah, and I forgot to mention you've got some extreme gore. After all, no children's website would be complete without some extreme gore. Alright guys, today we're going to be doing something weird. We're going to be talking about al-Fateh, the really bizarre kids website made by Hamas. My research for this vid has taken me to what are likely some of the weirdest, most disturbing, and most unintentionally hilarious corners of the internet. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. First, let's do some history. The years 2000 to 2005 saw a major conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, called the Second Intifada. I'm not going to go into too many details, but what you need to know for this video is that the primary Palestinian method of operation was mass-scale suicide bombings, usually on civilian targets, with buses and restaurants being the most common. During those years, there were about 10 attempted suicide bombings carried out by children. The Palestinian factions quickly saw the advantages of using minors for the bombings. A child could enter a crowded place in Israel without arousing suspicion, but how in the world could you convince a small child to carry out a suicide bombing? How can you get rid of a child's inherent desire to keep living? Anyway, on a completely unrelated note, it was about this time where a children's website called al-Fateh made its first appearance. Yeah, I think you can all see where this is going. The website is essentially a monthly magazine, with the target audience being very small children, roughly ages 5 to 9. All over the website, you see this very kid-friendly art, and I'm kind of embarrassed to admit that I don't think I've ever seen a better representation of the early 2000s aesthetic than this site. Like, seriously, look at this, look at it. Now, in the first few issues, the art, I'll admit, is really nice. Like, look at this. This is beautiful. This has soul. But after a few issues, it appears that the previous artist was killed in an Israeli strike or something because the quality of the art takes a real nosedive, and we get things like this. But presumably that guy died as well, and then we get what I can only describe as the single worst art style ever created in history. Like seriously, it takes serious talent to draw something this terrible. Like, take a look at this image. It's not a very nice image, but it's not the worst thing ever, right? Now, let me show you the full picture. What is this? What am I looking at here? Are those her legs? Are those her thighs? Why are they bigger than her head? Is this the author's poorly hidden fetish? Anyway, with all that being said, I will say that the weird art gives the site a really unique aesthetic that I can't really say I've seen anywhere else, and it blends with the sort of early 2000s aesthetic that I mentioned earlier. Anyway, after that we get to this period where they start experimenting with this weird-ass 3D Bitmoji art style, but thankfully that doesn't last because honestly it was starting to creep me out. Anyway, the art somehow takes an even bigger nosedive from there, and we're left with what I can only describe as the aesthetic of a flash game I would have played in elementary school during computer class when the teacher wasn't looking. Over here we have a comic that depicts a conversation between two Jews who are standing next to a big sack of money that is labeled the Holocaust. One Jew says to his friend, "We told a lie and people fell for it." And the other one says to him, "Let us go tell a new lie, my friend." Yeah, that's a lot to take in, but I think the most interesting thing here is the theory that Jews actually created the Holocaust in order to make money and get rich. And I'll give points for originality. I've actually never heard that one before. Now, believe it or not, this is far from the most pro-Nazi thing in al-Fateh. After just a few minutes of browsing, I was able to find articles in support of multiple Nazis and Nazi collaborators. These included Hajamin al-Husseini, a Palestinian leader and Ryan Gosling impersonator who was good friends with Hitler and helped recruit for the SS, Hassan Salameh, a Palestinian leader who took part in SS special operations, and of course Fawzi al-Qawqji, a literal German colonel from World War II. Now, some of you are probably already writing out comments saying, the website doesn't support Nazism, it just supports famous Palestinian leaders, and at that time the Palestinian leaders supported Nazism. And I think the natural question that raises is, why were the Palestinian leaders at that time so supportive of Nazism? But that's not the topic of today's video. Anyway, believe it or not, as we're going to see, the anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial are actually very far from the worst things on this website. Now, when I actually went to al-Fateh's website to see what was going on there and make this video, I was greeted with a whole lot of suspicious links and pornography. Well, at first I was a little confused about why an Islamic kids site would have such interesting content, I quickly realized that the website's URL had long since been abandoned. Suddenly, things made sense. After Israel built the famous West Bank Wall in 2006, suicide bombings basically stopped because it became really difficult for bombers to sneak into Israel in the ways that they used to. Since it was no longer a viable strategy for Hamas, it makes sense that they would try to hide their previous attempt at recruiting children to carry out the bombings. Thankfully, the website is still fully viewable through the Wayback Machine, which is how I was able to research for this video. I strongly recommend that you check out the website for yourself, just so you can see for yourself that everything I'm talking about is really there. But wait, I've mentioned this site is run by Hamas, but how do we know that it's specifically Hamas and not some other Palestinian faction? Well, multiple early 2000s Hamas sites and sites linked to the movement, such as the famous PalInfo, all contain links to al-Fateh and recommend that the children check it out. But the biggest proof is to simply read on the website. You cannot go 2 sentences in al-Fateh without coming across an explicit reference to Hamas or to its armed wing, the Izzadin al-Qassam brigades. The magazine is filled with pictures of small children wearing al-Qassam brigade's headbands and all sorts of art depicting Hamas fighters. Here we have some bad Photoshop of a dead Hamas guy at the Dome of the Rock. This might sound weird, but I find these old-style Photoshops kind of authentic. If this was today, you can bet they just used some crappy AI image or something. And of course, there are some sections that just straight up drop all the symbolism and just tell kids to join al-Qassam. One of them saying, "Therefore, it is up to you, brave children of my people, to back up the brigades, until Muslim victory, with the help of Allah." Hamas suicide bombers are mentioned constantly on the site, as perfect role models who lived the perfect lives and died the perfect death. On the site, there's a section called Abraz al-Ahdat fi Filastin, which roughly translates to the most notable events in Palestine. This section is essentially the website's news section, but as far as I can tell, only 2 events are ever reported there: Palestinians killing Israelis and Israelis killing Palestinians. That being said, very often the section shifts from reality a bit, and you get some crazy news about Lebanese militants sinking Israeli warships and all kinds of crazy stuff like that. A careful analysis of this section actually shows something really interesting. If you compare the bombings reported on the site to the full list of suicide bombings during the Second Intifada, you'll find that al-Fateh significantly plays up suicide bombings committed by Hamas. It attempts to downplay or completely ignore bombings committed by rival Palestinian factions like the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades. This whole beef is so messed up that it actually becomes hilarious. Like, damn, things are really heating up in the suicide bombing fandom. In addition, Hamas leaders are basically worshipped on the site. Multiple sections are devoted to Hamas founder Ahmed Yassin, and he's called the Prince of Martyrs, which sounds like a great name for a heavy metal band. On top of that, a lot of support is given to former Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh, with one part saying, "May God save Daddy Ismail Haniyeh." And to be fair, just look at this guy. Can you describe him with any words other than daddy? And if that wasn't enough, the website teaches kids that all Jews are their enemies, and that is their religious duty to kill them. Kids are told, and I quote, "Jihad is an individual duty for every Muslim when infidels capture Muslim lands. That is to say, it is currently required of every Muslim to fight the Jews who occupy Palestine." Oh, and by the way, I figure it's unnecessary to mention that when this website was active, there wasn't this whole thing where you say Zionist instead of Jew like there is now. al-Fateh was very open about what ethnic group they wanted wiped out. In a section about Hamas leader Salah Shahadeh, the magazine writes, "He instilled in us the love of jihad and resistance, and the love of killing Jews." In a message on the site from a Hamas fighter, he writes, "I write my message while I am in the trenches of jihad and resistance, amidst bullets and bombs with my machine gun beside me, awaiting battle, yearning to sever the heads of Jews and their collaborators." Oh yeah, and by the way, al-Fateh is super into beheadings for some reason, but we'll get to that later in the video. Oh, and yeah, let me just remind you all that this is a kid's website. In addition, Jews are constantly dehumanized and described as the sons of apes and pigs, which is a reference to a Quranic verse. Now, keep in mind, most of the children reading this magazine in places like Gaza had never seen or interacted with Jewish people before. So their only mental image was things like this coloring exercise, or this caricature here, which is helpfully titled, "The Jews are Criminals." By the way, in case you've forgotten just how young this site's target audience is, there's a section called Friends of al-Fateh. This was essentially a community gallery where young readers could email in photos of themselves and be featured on the site. Look at these kids, some of them don't look a day over 4. And it wasn't just a few radicalized kids visiting the site while it was active. al-Fateh bragged that it got over 48 million visits to the site in 2006 alone. Obviously, I don't know how accurate those figures are, but the fact of the matter is that this online magazine had a massive readership. Anyway, since I think you understand the site's stance on the Jews, I want to talk a bit about what it says about Israel. Now, Israel itself is never actually mentioned by name on the site, because obviously saying the name of the country is a recognition of sorts. Instead, various alternate names are used for Israel, each one going unfathomably harder than the last. These include the cursed state, the criminal state, the so-called state of Israel, the Zionist entity, the state of the monstrous entity, the thieving, usurping entity, or my personal favorite, the alleged entity. I like that one in particular because it doesn't even deny Israel's existence. It's just like, there may or may not be a state called Israel. We don't know. We're not sure. There are allegations of a state like that existing. Now, the presence of Israel is constantly felt on the site, even on articles that seemingly should have nothing to do with it. There's a section on the site that talks about basil and its medicinal properties. Since in Arabic, basil is called rihan, the discussion pivots to the unrelated town of Rihan, and it writes that the village was destroyed by the evil Zionists who scattered its residents in every direction. In a similar fashion, the site features a lot of articles on animals that used to roam the region. But, according to al-Fateh, the Zionists are apparently the primary cause of every single local extinction event in history. It doesn't matter if an animal vanished from the land centuries before Israel was even a thought. On this website, it's all their fault. Take this article about the hyena, for example. It starts off as a standard animal fact sheet, but, true to form, it ends with a section claiming that the Zionists are the reason that the hyena has become rare in the land. In reality, most of these species were driven out by habitat loss, hunting, or climate change long before the 20th century and the birth of Zionism. Anyway, now that you have a basic idea what the website is like, I want to go a bit more in depth about what's actually on it. But before I do, there's something I want to say. Before uploading this video, out of curiosity, I gave the script to ChatGPT and asked it to create a version that would allow the video to be monetized. It advised me to use terms like the H-word group or spicy vests. I'm sorry, but I will not be saying spicy vests. I decided to release this video completely uncensored because the subject deserves to be shown exactly as it is. This culture of algo-speak and self-censorship is killing the internet and I want no part in it. I'm going to keep releasing my videos uncensored, but I need your help. Since these videos are demonetized, I can only make them through the help of my Patreon supporters. Most YouTubers won't talk about this sort of stuff because YouTube dislikes these subjects, and therefore, these stories will wind up going untold. So, if you want to help me make more of these sort of in-depth rabbit hole deep dives and exposés regarding obscure Middle Eastern lore, head right over to my Patreon and join the Merchants Guild. Anyway, where were we? Oh yeah, the website itself. Now, at the beginning, the site's design wasn't great. This was the main page. The background is yellow, the people are purple for some reason, and the UI is a complete mess. But after a bit, they improved the UI, and we're left with this as the main page. Now, at the top of the page, we see al-Fateh's mascot, a young boy holding a sword, and that boy is also named al-Fateh. Now, I haven't mentioned that the Arabic word al-Fateh literally translates to the Conqueror. And after all, what's a better name for a kids magazine than the Conqueror? Now, at first I assumed the kid's name was a title of some sort, but no, the site literally explains that the kid was named al-Fateh at birth. It's a bold branding choice for a preschooler, and it sets the tone for everything that comes on the website. The top bar of the website over here isn't very interesting, although with one very important exception. Over here we have, I kid you not, the al-Fateh forums. Yup, a complete interactive early 2000s internet forums, all within the confines of the magazine. There are literally hundreds if not thousands of pages here, and it's beyond the scope of this video, so I'm going to skip over the forums for now. The sidebar over here is a lot more interesting. The first section is called Pictures of Palestinian Children. I'm going to talk about it later in the video, but for now just try to imagine what sort of pictures you expect are going to be there. The next section is the music section of al-Fateh. Now, I'm going to be honest, I had a lot of expectations going into this section because, and I say this without a drop of irony, Hamas music is amazing. I mean, seriously, is this not a bop? If you want to get a picture of just how good Hamas is at making music, in 2012 they released a song called Shock Israel Security, which was about killing Zionists and destroying Israel. Spurred on by the song's success, they then released a Hebrew version 2 years later, which was creatively titled Attack, Do Terror Attacks, which was supposed to serve as propaganda for them. But the Hebrew in the song was completely broken and nearly unintelligible, and the song actually wound up becoming a massive ironic hit in Israel. It was the biggest party song in Israel that year. Multiple remixes were made, including the wedding version that I played now, and I can guarantee you that if you go to Israel and yell, Tkof ta'aseh biguim, meaning attack, do terror attacks, at least 3 people will enthusiastically yell back, Chasel et kol hatzionim, meaning eliminate all the Zionists. And the fact that the song is listed on Wikipedia as a single by Hamas is still hilarious to me. Anyway, my point is that if Hamas was half as good as fighting as they were at music production, Israel would have been defeated a long time ago. Given all of that, al-Fateh's music section was a huge disappointment. Perhaps because I was viewing it through the Wayback Machine, I wasn't able to get any of the songs to play, so if there are any bangers on the site, they may be lost media. The next section is the games section. Now I got really excited and I was planning on doing speedruns of whatever jihadi games they had on this site, but alas, the games on the site seemed to no longer work, and for some reason my computer kept trying to open them as Excel files. Next up, we have the interactive coloring section. I created Muslim Lisa Simpson before I got bored and moved on to the next thing. Next, we have this section called Musharakat, which is only notable because it has this really cute pixel art. Honestly, when I see stuff like this, it makes me pretty sad that this sort of talent is being wasted on a site as disgusting as this one. The final section is the jokes section. The jokes in al-Fateh tend to be both morbid and unfunny. Here's one from the magazine's first issue. Two soldiers meet up on the battlefield. One soldier holds up the two-finger victory sign. The other soldier says, "Ah, so we won the battle?" The first soldier shakes his head and just says, "Nope, I was just letting you know that we only have two soldiers left." I will say it's a very Palestinian-coded joke in a few ways. Anyway, now that we've covered the side sections, let's talk about the actual articles on the magazine. There are a few recurring columns, and I'll go over the main ones. First of all, every issue of al-Fateh starts with the editorial, written by the chief editor. The editorials usually start off pretty normal, but consistently devolve into angry, seething rants. Take, for example, the first editorial section. Here it is in English. Children's journalism in general is still deficient and scarce, if compared to what non-Arabs publish in magazines in the West, and this is boring as hell, let's skip to the end. Unlike the Jews who took the initiative to publish the first children's magazine in the world a century and a half ago, and they continue to publish children's magazines and raise their children and shape their minds and hearts as they wish, as their Torah, Talmud, and protocols require. Yeah, that's what the editorials are like. And apparently Jews created children's magazines, and I'm just learning of this now. The editor has a few recurring quirks that you'll start to notice if you read as much as I did. The most prominent of which is definitely his extreme hatred of George Bush. Seriously, this guy manages to bring up George Bush in the most unrelated sections. In one part, he describes Bush as having a small black mind and a small black heart. And I'm like, dude, you're thinking of the other guy. You're thinking of the other dude. You're like 4 years too early. The next recurring section I'll talk about is simply titled A Martyr's Will, and in my opinion, it's the single most messed up and disturbing thing on the site. But to understand it, you first need to understand the way that jihadist propaganda works in Hamas-produced children's media. Many people are aware that Palestinian martyr culture is a thing, but few people really understand just how weird it gets. So to get a better understanding, I want to take a brief look at a much more famous piece of children's media created by Hamas, Tomorrow's Pioneers. If you've been on the internet for a while, you've probably come across pictures and videos of Farfour, the Palestinian Mickey Mouse. But most people don't know where he's from. He comes from a children's TV show called Tomorrow's Pioneers that was aired by Hamas's de facto propaganda arm, Al-Aqsa TV. Now at first, Tomorrow's Pioneers appears to just be a kids show, similar to Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers, with the main hosts being a young Palestinian girl named Sarah, and of course, Farfour the Mouse. But very quickly becomes apparent that the show is essentially the same as al-Fateh, where the Jews are the cause of every bad thing in the world, and joining the Al-Qassam brigades is framed as the only way to truly fight them. Each episode of the show has a different lesson. In one of them, Farfour is caught cheating on a test and attempts to excuse his behavior by saying that the Jews blew up his notebooks, which is a classic excuse that I think we've all used in our teenage years. The teacher explains that despite how evil the Jews are, sometimes in life you need to take responsibility instead of blaming them. This is a surprisingly good message from the show, which the show then proceeds to completely ignore for the rest of its episodes. Now, all of this was airing in 2007, which was a crucial year for Palestinian internal politics. I'm going to heavily oversimplify here, but essentially there was a conflict between two Palestinian factions, Hamas and Fatah, which was starting to transition into a Palestinian civil war. The Palestinian government, called the PA, was run by Fatah, and they were more powerful in the West Bank as opposed to the Hamas, which was more dominant in Gaza. The conflict between the two Palestinian groups was also essentially a propaganda battle for the next generation of the Palestinian youth, and that was a battle that Hamas was clearly winning, specifically because of charismatic children's characters like Farfour. In order to compete with Hamas, Fatah decided to start their own Sesame Street-style children's show, which, like its Hamas counterpart, strongly supported armed attacks against Israel. Sadly, aside from a few screenshots and small clips, the show is mostly lost media. But anyway, the question remained, why in the world would any Palestinian child choose to watch the new Fatah show when they could just watch the beloved Farfour on Tomorrow's Pioneers? So, Fatah did something ridiculous. They filled their show to the brim with Mickey Mouse imagery, probably hoping that unassuming Palestinian kids would see Walmart Farfour and assume that they were watching an episode of Tomorrow's Pioneers. Seriously, Mickey Mouse is everywhere in the show. You won't see this many Mickey Mice anywhere, including on Mickey Mouse. So, essentially you had two rival factions fighting a Mickey Mouse-themed propaganda war. Fatah also played dirty against Farfour. Since they basically controlled the Palestinian government, the Palestinian Information Minister Mustafa Barghouti launched a public and ultimately unsuccessful campaign to ban Tomorrow's Pioneers, although he took no action against Fatah's copy of the show. But all this public fighting and controversy awoke a beast. A new group joined the story, a feared group far more brutal in its methods than Hamas or Fatah. I am of course referring to the Walt Disney Corporation. Multiple Disney executives, including CEO Bob Iger and the daughter of Walt Disney herself, watched Tomorrow's Pioneers and were completely furious with what they saw. They told Hamas to stop using Farfour immediately, but instead of complying, Hamas doubled down and straight up released a fully animated children's parody of Disney's The Lion King, depicting Hamas as Simba the Lion, returning to cleanse his homeland of evil rats, which represented rival Palestinian groups such as Fatah. But eventually, the pressure from Disney became too much to resist. Hamas caved and agreed to remove Farfour from the show. They clearly felt the conflict with the Big Mouse would end with them losing. I still think it's hilarious that Israel and America can't tell Hamas what to do, but the Walt Disney Company managed to boss them around like this. It kind of reminds me about how in the DC universe, the Joker is canonically terrified of the IRS and always makes sure to do his taxes. But while Hamas feared Disney, they were completely fine stealing from DreamWorks. In an issue of al-Fateh magazine featuring an article about the Quranic chapter Surat al-Nahl, which means the bee, the illustrators needed a visual. Did they commission an original drawing? Did they find a generic clip art bee? Nope, they literally just ripped a render of Jerry Seinfeld's character from the Bee Movie. Clearly they didn't check his early life section on Wikipedia. And by the way, don't worry, I'll get back to al-Fateh magazine really soon. Anyway, back to everyone's favorite mouse. Since Farfour couldn't just disappear from the show one day, the writers wrote his departure into the plot. It all starts when Farfour meets with his grandfather, who, I happen to notice, appears to be a very normal-looking Palestinian man, which raises the important question of how his grandson is an anthropomorphic mouse. It would appear that Grandpa is into some real freaky shit. The grandfather explains to Farfour that the Israeli city of Tel Aviv was actually built on the ruins of a Palestinian town called Tel el-Rabia. At first, this might sound like it makes sense. Tel el-Rabia is Arabic for Spring Hill, and Tel Aviv is Hebrew for Spring Hill. But in reality, there was never any town called Tel el-Rabia, and the city of Tel Aviv was built on empty sand dunes outside the city of Jaffa. Grandpa hands Farfour documents, which he claims prove that Tel Aviv was stolen, and tells Farfour to keep them safe. Farfour then proceeds to drop an emote for some reason. After that, Grandpa does this. Farfour, in a complete state of shock, then says this. I'm sorry, what? The Jews did not kill your grandfather. That happened like 5 seconds ago. You saw it. He literally just did that. Anyway, Farfour's nightmare is only just beginning, because he's then captured by Israeli agents and intensely interrogated. You can tell they put a lot of effort into this scene. I mean, just look at the detail on that Israeli flag. The Israeli demands that Farfour give over the documents, but Farfour stubbornly refuses. Anyway, it's at this point that we arrive at one of the most surreal and iconic scenes in the history of children's media. I can't do it justice by explaining it, so I'll just play the clip.
نعم أحبابنا الأطفال، لقد فقدنا أعز صديق لنا، فرفور. لقد استشهد فرفور وهو يدافع عن أرضه، يدافع عن أرض آبائه وأجداده. استشهد على أيدي المجرمين القتلة.
You're laughing. Farfour is dead and you're laughing. You're laughing at Gore of My Comfort character. Anyway, Farfour's death might be able to be explained by pressure from Disney, but the next few deaths in the show certainly can't be. Let me explain. At the beginning of Season 2, we are introduced to Farfour's replacement, a bee named Nahul, who appears while he is creepily hanging from the ceiling for some reason.
من أنت؟ ومن أين جئت؟ أنا نحول. ومن نحول؟ أنا نحول ابن عم فرفور. وماذا تريد؟
أريد أن أواصل مشوار ابن عمي فرفور. How dare you stand where he stood?
But Nahul only lasts for one season before he too is killed by Israel. And here you start to see the basic loop of Tamar's pioneers. Season 1 was hosted by Farfour, whose name is a play on the Arabic word for mouse. Season 2 is hosted by Nahul, whose name is a play on the Arabic word for bee. Continuing the pattern, each season is hosted by an animal host, with their names all being puns. And very notably, not one of them lasts more than one season without being brutally killed by the Israelis. This is actually a genius move of propaganda warfare that serves two purposes. The first is to desensitize Palestinian children to martyrdom and make them accept it as a part of daily life. The second is to make the viewers grow close to their beloved hosts, only to have them get killed by the Israelis at the end of the season, thereby arousing a sense of rage amongst the viewers. Imagine how your childhood self would react if halfway through Sunday morning PBS Kids cartoons, a bunch of Russian soldiers burst in, beat Elmo to death, and threw Kermit off of a building. You'd probably hate Russia for the rest of your life, and you'd want some way to avenge Elmo. And Tamar's pioneers very clearly said what that way was: joining the Al-Qassam brigades. Anyway, this is only the beginning of the Tamar's pioneers iceberg. The show gets significantly more weird, ridiculous, and disturbing, and features what is, in my opinion, the single most messed up scene in television history: the mother recreation scene. If you know what I'm referring to, I'll just say that I'm sorry. A lot of people think this show is mostly lost media, but you can still find a lot of it on the internet if you know where to look. If you want to see me do a deep dive into the lost sections of Tamar's pioneers, drop a like and let me know in the comments. But anyway, this isn't a video about Tamar's pioneers. This is a video about al-Fateh magazine. So now that we've understood the way the martyrdom narrative works, let's get back to the website. Now, martyrdom is everywhere on al-Fateh, because the narrative that they're trying to push is that the only way to actually fight Israel and make a difference involves you dying in the end. The very first issue of al-Fateh has a section called The First Martyrs, with these relatively graphic illustrations. In addition, there's a section on al-Fateh called Pictures of Palestinian Children. Now, full disclosure, there are 0 normal pictures in this section, like literally none. Overall, the pictures can be divided into 2 very broad categories. I'll call one kids carrying out military operations. Here, you can find pictures of small children in Hamas uniforms holding weapons like knives and guns and going to attack Israeli soldiers. But the most common pictures are children in suicide vests. The second category is what I can only describe as the aftermath category. Here, we have what is presumably the aftermath of the attacks. There are pictures of dead children and aftermath photos, with some of them being so ridiculously gory that I had to take pauses while researching this part. While obviously I can't show anything from this section, I'll talk about one thing that caught my eye. The photo is of a bloody severed head of a woman on the floor, whose hijab is still wrapped around her head. The woman in question is Zainab Abu Salam, a Palestinian woman who detonated her explosive vest and killed 2 Israelis. The caption reads, "Her head was severed from her pure body. However, her veil remained in order to adorn it to paradise. O Zainab, O sister of men." This caption is one of many examples of al-Fateh especially praising instances of decapitation. Apparently, martyrdom is considered especially praiseworthy if the person is decapitated in the process. Suicide bombings are never called by that name. Instead, they are referred to as amaliyat istishhadiyya, which means martyrdom operations. This is because suicide is forbidden in Islam, but martyrdom is considered one of the greatest acts that a Muslim can do. And these martyrdom operations are mentioned constantly. There's a column that appears in all editions of al-Fateh, which is called A Martyr's Will. The column contains the last will and testament of a suicide bomber that he wrote before carrying out his attack. All of these wills contain one thing in common: a call to action, calling on Palestinians to follow in their footsteps. I noticed that the first of these wills didn't actually belong to a suicide bomber. Rather, it belonged to someone that I instantly recognized: Yahya Ayash. Ayash was Hamas's chief engineer and created the bombs used in some of the most prominent bus bombings. He's considered a Palestinian hero, and it's hard to find a Palestinian city in Gaza or the West Bank that doesn't have a street named after him. In the end, Israel assassinated him by sneaking him a cell phone that had a bomb in it, and detonated it when he made a call. They were really foreshadowing with that one. On Ayash's section on al-Fateh, it says, "The heroic engineer swore to avenge those martyrs with a revenge that would make the Jews weep blood. He prepared a plan for 5 martyrdom operations, which his heroic Mujahideen brothers carried out with precision, challenging the Jewish military establishment, which had never witnessed anything like it." In order to make the bombings sound more appealing to children, the website usually refers to them as weddings. That, of course, being a reference to the 72 virgins that the martyr will marry when he gets to heaven. The site leans really heavily into the 72 virgin stuff. One part tells that before he committed a bombing, the bomber's young son pointed at the sky and said, "Look, father, at this beautiful bride. She is calling to you." The father looked up at the sky and said to his son, "Is she? I don't see her. Where?" The little boy pointed to the sky again and said, "There she is, Dad. She's calling you." Yeah, completely normal society. Oh, and also this shit did not happen. As you've already seen, the bombings are mythologized as these legendary, even magical events. I'll read another example of this. After Muhammad was martyred and his pure body was taken to the hospital, in the crowded reception room, people were surprised by a small bird flying and landing on the bed on which the body of the martyr Abu Sahel lay. When they moved the body to the refrigerator, the bird went in with it. As soon as the doctor closed the door, the bird fluttered toward the fan, and the fan hit it and caused it to fall as a martyr on the chest of the martyr Abu Asal. So the bird got martyred by the fan? Yeah, I have no idea what this story is even supposed to be about. All I can tell you is that it also did not happen. Even in articles that shouldn't have anything to do with martyrdom, the topic still finds a way to show up. Basically, every story in al-Fateh ends with the main character dying in some way or another. I'll give you what I think is the funniest example of this. A story is given of a Palestinian girl named Suad, who promises to show Israeli soldiers the location where Palestinian militants are hiding. Instead, she leads the soldiers to a minefield where they all die. Now, here's the funniest part. At the end of the story, the writers must have realized that they had accidentally given the opposite message that they wanted to give. Suad had just successfully fought the Israelis and had come out of it with her life intact, and that wasn't what they wanted kids doing. So they added this unrelated paragraph at the end where it just says that she died and became a martyr without explaining how she died or how that has anything to do with the rest of the story. The message is clear. You can't make a difference without dying. Anyway, I'll touch on a few of the magazine's other columns. First of all, you have a column called Dear Girl of the Future, which is a column dedicated to female readers of the magazine. With a name like Girl of the Future, I expected it to be pretty progressive. So what's in this section? It's the cooking section. Cooking and literally nothing else. Then we have what I call the grandma section. All of these begin with the grandson asking his grandmother a question, and grandma responding with an insane and usually racist rant. I'll talk about one of the funniest ones, simply titled Death Games. The grandson asks his grandmother how the Jews were able to steal Palestine from the Arabs. The grandma responds and says, "In cooperation with the British, they would place bombs in the streets disguised as children's toys. If someone picked up one of these games of death, it would explode on him. I saw with my own eyes a pregnant mother and her young son explode." Alright. In all seriousness, can we talk about how dumb of a military strategy this would be if this actually happened? I'm going to remind you guys that she said this was the way that the Jews won the Palestine war. Not a way, the way. You would figure that this would only hurt the children and that the adults would be able to fight the war, right? Also, wouldn't it kind of lose effectiveness after the first few toys start exploding? Wouldn't people just kind of stop touching toys on the street? But as dumb as it is, the story serves a very important purpose. Think about it from a child's perspective. You can tell a child all sorts of things about stolen land and virgins in heaven, but that won't make him want to go out and fight the Israelis. But tell a kid that he's fighting against the guys who make exploding kids' toys? Yeah, that'll radicalize a child real fast. Anyway, now we've gotten to the final section of this video, which I'll just title Random Funny Stuff I Saw in al-Fateh while making this video. While browsing al-Fateh, you see all kinds of weird stuff that you kind of just need to accept, like Annoying Orange, who keeps appearing on the site for some reason. One of these things is the ridiculous levels of historical revisionism on the site. According to the websites, Muslims actually invented the concept of human rights and created equality between slaves and their masters. Now, I'm sure the masters agreed with that statement, but I have my doubts regarding the slaves. The site even writes that, today, many scientists think that Columbus was not really the first one to discover America, because he had reached it hundreds of years after the Arabs and Muslims had reached it. And no, they do not elaborate on what the hell they're talking about here. But after all, can you argue with a source as strong as many scientists? Also, every year when Valentine's Day rolls around, the magazine releases an angry article against Valentine's Day, calling it pagan and evil and telling kids not to celebrate it. It sounds like somebody got rejected. Anyway, I could go on for hours and hours about all the weird stuff on al-Fateh. To make this video, I actually only read through about 5 issues of the magazine, and there are literally hundreds. Nor did I go over all the racism in the magazine, or the weird ISIS stuff in later issues. But honestly, I can't really bring myself to look at this goddamn site for one more second. There's just one final thought that I want to share with you before I go. Recently, I found myself watching footage from the October 7th attacks. And as I sat there looking at the ages of the men involved, a single sickening thought occurred to me. Assuming these guys are now in their early 20s, that means they were toddlers and young children in the mid-2000s. That means they are the exact target demographic for everything we just looked at. How many of the men that we saw that day were once small children sitting on a carpet crying over the death of a mouse named Farfour? How many of them spent their afternoons scrolling through the al-Fateh Martyr's Will section, learning that their own decapitation would be an upgrade for their soul? How many of them had their childhood stolen by this propaganda machine? No child should have to grow up like this. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, or at least learned something from it. I know it's very different from the sort of videos I usually make, and don't worry, we'll be back to history real soon. For any questions, sponsorship requests, or video requests, you can contact me at hasmonianhistorian@gmail.com. If you're interested in more obscure Middle Eastern lore, feel free to support me at hasmonian_historian at patreon.com. Of course, thank you so much to all my top-level supporters, 23 Tova Arm, Max Von Dij, Howard Wetzman, and Daniel Yonatan, as well as all my other patrons, Bera, Dan Polomak, Arsen T. Captain, Natalie Bates, Yosef Dintis, Ellie, Skorol, Akiva Elkin, the Denktu Dayan, Javi Neven, Ol001, Yuval BCD, Brenton Jackson, Shimon Weinbach, Op Support, Bibiati, Kenny Zhang, Mark Salamanik, Tim Olivieri, Ulrich Maccabi, Sky Eye, Nav Crow, Kartira Ida, Blarfingar, Ron Gershkowitz, Rajmohana Paniker, Michael Wagner, Liam Dahan, Zach Bernstein, Lachaim, Leo Avidan, Mo Reasoning, Byron Ritchie, Zui Hashmonei, Itamar Borgvir, Akila Naraswamy, Stefano C, Shaina Chumbian, Zachary Cohen, Dirty Mug, Shmuel Chazan, Alonjak, Ryan Chag, Jacob Zieper, Rish. One moment here. Sorry, that's just loading. Adam Kalforos, Konstantin K, Robert Nichols, Kukushka, Evan Berry, Anton N. Ganesh, Bobby L., Mike Stalka, Simcha Letterman, Jesse Chang, Yoshua Dalvin, Jacob G, AJ Smart, John Sword, Amber Norman, D99D, and Dor. Thank you all so much. I couldn't have done this without you. Long live Nguema, and have a wonderful day.